Let's take a moment today and talk a little bit about suffering. Because certainly in recent years, we've all gone through some suffering. And this is what it says in 1 Peter 4:16. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in his name. So I'm going to tell you something about suffering that is a different perspective, particularly about the suffering that comes from being a believer, as opposed to all the other suffering that we have been through. We suffer. Some of us are really good at it. Some of us suffer well and others suffer poorly. We suffer from grief, from pain, guilt, both physical and psychological. We suffer failures, big and small, and we suffer losses of all sizes, and we suffer some disappointment too. Suffering is part of life. You can't escape it in this life, but when we suffer for the faith, that is different. We can be ashamed of suffering, and we can bring on ourselves and foist it on others. And that kind of suffering we can be ashamed of, but no shame in suffering for Jesus. Glory to God when we suffer for his name and in his name. By the way, if you're being asked if you are a Christian, that is not persecution. And that's really not a source of suffering. We American believers, we don't suffer as much as we claim for the faith. Other Christians around the world, they do suffer far more because they follow Christ. We follow Christ, but we don't live in the harsh conditions or in the persecution the rest of the world often lives in. Some, I understand, but perhaps if others knew we were Christians, or if we witnessed more, we might suffer some more for the faith. If we talked more about what we believe, we might suffer, but we avoid suffering, and maybe because there's already a lot of other kind of suffering. But suffering for the faith seems to be particularly unattractive for us. Maybe some suffering would follow if we lived a more outward faith. So we haven't experienced much persecution. And I have tremendous respect and totally honor those who suffer as Christians. We have much to learn about this, and hopefully we don't have to learn the hard way, because the Bible warns us that we're going to suffer as Christians. All the suffering that we go through is not from persecution, not even from prosecution. The suffering is just from living in a fallen world, or just from being rebellious. We have much to learn, and hopefully we don't have to learn it again the hard way.